Hi, I'm Dr. John Kavanaugh, and welcome back to AJS101, Lesson 4. Now we're going to do Part 2. Let's talk about scientific police management. Scientific police management is the application of social science techniques to police management for the purpose of increasing the effectiveness of police programs and reducing citizen complaints. And why social science techniques, these can be research techniques, these can be evaluation techniques, these can be social psychology techniques of how to deal with people. There's all sorts of social science information and techniques that can be helpful to any management, including police management. Now, scientific police management came into being in the 1960s in response to the need to properly plan and evaluate programs funded by the federal government through the LEAA, the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration. Such funding and programs continue today through private sources like foundations and the federal government's National Institute of Justice, Bureau of Justice Studies, National Criminal Justice Reference Center, and other agencies. Back in the 60s, there was a big move to professionalize police, and a lot of money was placed into police work. And a lot of money was given to police departments to develop new programs to improve their police officers, their operation, and even to deal with crime in the community. Now, the federal government didn't want to just throw this money at police departments and then say, how'd that program work out? Because most people, even if the program failed, wouldn't admit that their program failed, and they'd say it was great. So they decided to use scientific social science techniques for these programs. So if you wanted a grant, let's say you wanted to do a burglary reduction program, you had to submit a plan which detailed exactly how the program will work, how many personnel does it need, what equipment does it need, how long will it take to get up and running, how long will it be in operation before we can find out if it's working or not. And you also had to have an evaluation plan. In other words, how are we going to evaluate whether this program worked or not? And that basically meant you had to come up in your plan with objectives and goals. Goals being your general end, reduction of so much burglaries, and your objectives being to achieve certain things that will that will advance the goal. Like doing so many store security checks, doing so many anti-burglary educational programs. Those would be the objectives to the overall goal of reducing burglaries. So you had to submit that, and if they liked it, you'd get the grant. And then when the program was finished, they would look at the evaluation results. If it was a successful program, they would publish it and show it to other police departments as something that should be emulated. If it failed, well, better luck next time. One such study was the famous Kansas City police study. The Kansas City police was a scientific study of police management techniques. It was in Kansas City, and it tried to show whether the amount of police officers on patrol affected crime rates and citizen fear of crime, whether routine police patrol affected crime rates or citizen fear of crime. So, and this is something which, by the way, could never be done today, because this is a true scientific experiment. This is the way they test drugs for efficiency. But they basically, well, let me explain how a scientific test is done, experiment is done. What you do is, let's say you want to see if a drug is successful in curing a certain disease. Right? Well, you get a group of people who you're going to give the drug to. And you have to randomly select these people and assign them to 3 different groups. One group gets the full dose of a drug, the other group might get half a dose, and the third group gets no dose. But they're all randomly selected from the group that you gathered to test the drug, which would be people with the condition. And because they're randomly selected for the 3 groups, the odds are that each group will be very similar to the other, have the same number of old people, same number of young, same number of severely ill, same number of not, same number of women, men, strong immune systems, weak immune systems. They'll pretty much be identical groups in terms of the factors that might affect the ability of the drug to cure the condition. And the group that gets the drug is the experimental group. The group that gets the lesser drug would also be an experimental group. And the group that gets nothing is called the control group. And all three groups think they're getting the drug, but the control group is getting like saline water or something that can't do anything. And the other two groups either get the full or the half dose. And you measure the level of the seriousness of the disease at the start of the study, and then you give the drugs and you track what happens to the level of the disease. And if the greatest cure is among the full dose group and a lesser cure in the middle group, and no real substantial cure in the third group, then you got a drug that works. The reason why you need the third group, called the group that gets the placebo or gets nothing, is because sometimes just getting an injection or a drug makes people think they're going to be helped, and they get better because of that. So you want to control for the placebo effect by doing that. Well, that's what they did in Kansas City. They divided Kansas City into 15 areas. In 5 of those 15, they doubled the routine police patrol. In another 5, they eliminated the police patrols completely. And in the last 5 areas, they just did patrol as usual. Okay? So now you have 3 areas: double patrol, regular patrol, and no patrol. That's your control group there, that last one. And they did before and after measurements of crime and citizens' fear of crime. And the basic result was the before and after measurements of crime and citizens' fear of crime revealed no difference between the areas. In other words, the levels of fear of crime were the same in all 3 areas, regardless if there was twice as many police versus no police. And the citizens' fear, so the crime itself measurements didn't change. There was just as much crime in all 3 areas. So the patrol had no effect on how much crime was occurring and whether citizens were fearful of crime. The study concluded that routine preventative police patrol had no effect on crime or citizens' fear of crime. And a later study showed that police response times, in other words, how quickly police get to the crime scene, was also not related to arrest of suspects or citizen satisfaction with the police. So needless to say, this was quite a shock to the police community because routine patrol was always considered the bread and butter of police work, the foundation of police work. And now you have the scientific study which is showing that it really doesn't do much for crime and it doesn't do much for citizens' fear of crime. Now, there has been some criticism of the study that it wasn't perfectly conducted, that sometimes cops who were on their way to a meal or something would drive through the no police patrol area. But nevertheless, it suggests that police patrol is not the be-all and end-all of crime prevention or making citizens feel safe. So the Kansas City results have caused some departments, therefore, to switch to a different type of patrol called directed patrol, to increase patrol efficiency and results. So, directed patrol uses scientific analysis of crime frequency in an area and patterns. Is it going up or down? Is it spreading? To direct patrol activities and personnel allocations to certain areas at certain times. Now, they use computers for these programs. They use computers to track the crime types, the locations, and very importantly, what day of the week and what time of the day that these occur. And then the computers more or less predict which areas are going to have the most crime at what times. So you could put more police officers into those areas. This is a very sophisticated version of the old police pin map. Back in the old days, the 1900s, police departments would have a map of the precinct, and one of the officers who would collect the crime reports at the end of the day or the start of the new day from the previous day, that officer would put a pin at the location of robberies and burglaries and any other crime of interest. So maybe robberies were red and burglaries were green. And police officers could look at the map and see where most of these crimes were occurring so they could give extra attention to patrolling those areas. Now, the problem, of course, was that those pins only showed the location. It didn't show the times they were occurring and the days they were occurring. So, I mean, police may be focusing on burglaries because of all the pins in an area, but those burglaries were occurring at a different time of day, so they were kind of wasting their time. With the new computer programs called hotspot programs, they can take into account the day of the week, the time of the day, so officers on a particular shift know where the frequency of crime is in their areas. And they can also track the crime trends to see if there's crimes moving from one area to another. You know, a robbery is increasing and moving from this area to that area, so police can keep up with the crime patterns that occur in a community. Okay, what were the changes that were suggested by the scientific research? Well, more neighborhood programs of all kinds were suggested. More college-educated police officers. Studied shows that they use force less often and they generally had better ratings. So let's get some more college-educated cops. By the way, the response to that was all sorts of scholarship programs in the 70s and 80s to get cops college-educated degrees. Also, more departments representative of their community's racial profile and also in gender. Because there are very few women police officers traditionally. There still aren't that many, but there's more than there were in the past. And this is not so much due to discrimination, perhaps, as the fact that the police job may not be quite as attractive to women as it is to men. Or at least the police job as the males have traditionally shaped that job and as is portrayed in the media as being a very macho occupation. But again, there are certain occupations that are more attractive to men versus women. You don't have that many men becoming kindergarten teachers. And that's not because schools are discriminatory against men for those jobs. It's just a matter of interest. And part of that is the reason why women are underrepresented. But, but they also may feel less welcome because of the general male-dominated culture of policing, which is not as strong today, but still exists to a certain degree. The scientific research also suggested restraint on the use of force, especially deadly force. Not only for the lawsuits and the danger that it involves, but it really does a number on police-community relations, especially in minority communities. Let's talk about police discretion. Now, discretion is the exercise of what by an officer in some official duty. What's the magic word that discretion means? Choice. Discretion is the exercise of choice by an officer in some official duty. And police officers get to make a lot of choices because of the nature of their work, and also because most cops are not supervised. Most cops are out there on patrol without a boss looking over their shoulder. So police, and so no one knows what they're doing a lot of the time. So police have a lot of discretion. And discretion permeates all police activities. It affects who police watch. You know, if you're on patrol, you're driving, or you're on a fixed foot post, you know, if you see somebody and you think they're suspicious and you watch them, they're much more likely to get arrested because you're going to maybe decide to follow them too. Whereas if you never looked at the person, then nothing would ever happen. So who the police watch is a decision, a discretionary decision that can have impacts in terms of arresting somebody. Who they follow. You watch somebody, if it looks suspicious, are they so suspicious that you want to follow them, or are you just going to walk away and forget about it? Who they stop and question. Police officers, again, if they reasonably suspect somebody is about to commit a crime, or is committing a crime, or just committed a crime, can stop and question them and ask them what's going on. Who they frisk. The police officer has reasonable fear that the person is armed and dangerous. They can pat down the outer clothing looking for weapons and only going under the clothing or into pockets if they feel something which may be a weapon. So who they frisk, who they arrest, who they is another issue. Who they search. You have to have probable cause to search somebody. And also who they arrest versus who they might summons or who they might let go. Right? For minor crimes, there's often, a decision on how high can I charge. Will I give a summons, take them into custody or her into custody, or just give them a warning? And those are discretion. There's also discretion in what offenses they charge somebody with. Certain crimes are felonies versus misdemeanors based upon certain subjective judgments by the police officer. The difference between felony grand larceny and misdemeanor petty larceny is the value of the property. Usually if the property is valued at $1,500 or more, it's felony grand larceny. This is the property that was stolen. And if it's under $1,500, it's misdemeanor petty larceny. So if it's if it's some item that there's no price tag on because it isn't new, it's the discretion of the police officer if it's in the border whether to charge felony or misdemeanor, and that's discretion. Also, how aggressively they collect evidence for or against a person. If a cop really wants to get somebody or they think the person's innocent, they may spend a lot of time trying to get evidence to convict or exculpate. And that's another decision, and this is mostly detectives, but it involves cops too. But that's another discretionary decision. Now, discretion must be exercised for two reasons. Police have to have discretion because, first, you want to temper justice with mercy. During my early years of police work, I was at Kennedy Airport near one of the boarding gates where they were searching passengers before they got on the plane. And there was an elderly lady from like Minnesota returning home, and the screening people discovered a can of mace in her pocket that she had purchased for self-defense because she was in, dangerous New York. In New York City, that was a misdemeanor. That was a crime. And because she wasn't a New York State resident, she would not have been eligible for a summons. She would have been an online custodial arrest. She would have been in the holding cell with hookers and prostitutes and other people locked up in Queens County that evening. But rather than arrest her, I just took the mace, explained that it was illegal, and I just dumped it. And I said, get on the plane. That's a matter of discretion where you want to temper justice with mercy. And the other reason why you have to have discretion is that you can't arrest everybody or summons everybody. If you stopped every person you saw committing a traffic infraction, you wouldn't get more than a mile from the police station because all kinds of people are going above the speed limit, not signaling turns. They have a tail light out. You can't summons everybody. You can't arrest everybody. Now, discretion can be exercised for ethical and unethical reasons. And this is important because discretion is good when it's to temper justice with mercy, when you use ethical criteria. But discretion is very bad if you use unethical criteria. So let's go over the list of unethical criteria. Discretion exercised for unethical criteria, it's wrong. And what are the unethical criteria? Well, how about race? You don't like blacks, so you'll lock up a black person. When it was a white person, you wouldn't have done it. Or you don't like whites and you're black, or whatever. Right? So race is a bad reason to use discretion. As is gender, or more appropriately in police situations, probably attractiveness or lack of same. The really good-looking girl in the car, you give a break to for speeding, but, somebody not attractive, they get the summons. Not a great exercise of ethics. Ethnicity, by the same token, is another bad reason to exercise discretion. The way a person dresses, are they dressed shoddy versus really like expensive clothing? When I was a cop, there were the so-called counterculture hippies with long hair and tie-dyed, ties and raggy jeans and bell-bottoms, and they were associated with the counterculture, not liking police and the government and drug usage, and a lot of cops would hassle them just because of the way they were dressed. Not ethical. And friendship, it's technically not ethical, to give your friend a break if you pull him over for speeding, but give tickets to everybody else. But of course, realistically, most people actually don't consider it to be unethical not to ticket a family member or a friend, assuming we're not talking a serious crime here, like a speeding, not because it's good, but frankly, all the social harm you would cause to your family if you were ticketing your own mother. So anyway, those are the unethical criteria. What about discretion for ethical reasons? Well, there are a number of ethical reasons. The seriousness of the crime. That should be a minor crime. You give a person a break, but you shouldn't be cutting breaks for murder. What is the excuse? Did this person shoplift milk because he had to feed his starving baby, or did he shoplift milk because he wanted to mix it with vodka and get drunk? Does the person show remorse? Are they sorry? Are there extenuating circumstances? Is the person speeding really fast because his wife is in the car having a baby versus he wants to get to a party? And the availability of alternatives to arrest. You know, if it's not too minor a crime and it's a child and the parents are there and they're really upset and you think they're going to handle the situation, maybe you don't want to arrest. But regardless, departments should train police officers in the proper use of discretion. And you have to do this through written guidelines and through training. Police should have guidelines as to what are the good criteria, what are the bad criteria, and what crimes can you do discretion and what are too serious to do discretion. These should be written policies, and they also should be included in training programs. So that concludes our lesson 4, and I'll see you at lesson 5.